In this video I want to show how to create piano key borders a couple of different ways, and then other ways that I use that border that I created. So I'm going to say design sew quilt, start new. Yes, I want to replace it. Yes, let's erase it. Yes, let's reset. I'm going to enter a block pattern, and I want to enter the rectangle manually. And it really doesn't matter what my height is. Let's just say 6 by 6, continue. And I have my snap on. If it's not, it'll say off. So I'm going to say snap on. And I want the grid on, and I want the grid at 1 inch. So my options here is I just keep tapping on it, and my grid size changes between 1/4, 1/2, and 1 inch. So I want it at 1 inch. And I'm finished setting my block up. Now I need to add just a line to my pattern. So I'm in my geometric catalog. Go line. I want this line. Continue. And it came in at a 45-degree angle going across my block. So I could just rotate it by spinning it, but I'm going to just say rotation. I'm going to go to 45 degrees. So it says 45 right there, and do that. So now my line is vertical. I want to move it, so I'm going to move it down just so it connects to a line, and I'm going to stretch it so that it's just the length of my block. So I'm going to zoom out so I can see it, and let's pan. I need to touch the anchor point of my pattern, so I'm going to touch the point that's already on my block pattern, and then the other one I just drag it up. Finished. I'm going to repeat this pattern, so I'm going to tap repeat. I'm going to touch this line, continue, and I want my X repeat, and I want it to be 2. So I've got to tap it so it turns red. Then the plus minus key, it now says I have 2 repeats, but because the distance is 0, nothing's happening. So I want to change my distance to 1, and now I have them 1 inch apart. Finished. And now I'm going to combine these two, combine patterns. I want this one first, and I want my start point to be up at the top, so I'm going to swap start end points, continue. Then I want this one, and this time I want my start point at the bottom, so it goes this way, this way, this way, continue, and I want continuous stitch line. Finished. Okay, I still need to do one more thing. I need a connector going off. It doesn't really matter, it can be on either side. So I'm going to add a pattern, block pattern. I'm going to use the current block, and I want that line again. Continue. I'm going to rotate it again 45 degrees. And I actually could just set my width here rather than doing the stretch. So width, I want 1 inch because that is my distance between the between my piano key lines. I'm going to move it. I'm going to move it up here and snap it there because my snap is on. And I'm going to switch my start and ends now. I could do it later when I combine it if I wanted to. Finished. And now I'm going to combine my patterns. This one first, and then this one, continue, and finish. So there's my basic piano key pattern. So I want to go ahead and save that into somewhere in my, wherever is logical for you. Save a quilt or a pattern, save a pattern from the quilt. I want this, continue. I'm going to just say, let's see, clear, piano, key, P2P. And enter. And then wherever you want to put it, I may already have one. Nope, I don't. So now that's usable. Now I could just always use it that way, but I made it into a really big block. So let's just move this so we can see it. Continue, move. I always think it should know what I'm wanting it to do, and it doesn't. Pan. And move it some more. I don't really need the grid on anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat this. Finished. Going to repeat the patterns. That one, continue. And I want to do the X repeat again, so I can make it however long I want. Let's just make it 5 repeats to start. Finished. And I'm going to combine those. This, continue, this, continue, this, continue, continue. Finished. Zoom out. Now the first time I made this, I actually made it wide enough for my whole border, and I do like that because that means that when I put it into my border, all my lines are going to stay perfectly parallel. So I can, now that I've made this wider, I can just repeat that so I don't have to keep connecting so many. So I'm going to repeat the patterns, that one, and let's go here to the X repeats and just make it however big you want it. So now it's at 70 inches because I have 7 repeats. Zoom out. And I'm going to just say finished. I'm going to combine my patterns, and that's when I wanted to zoom out so that I can see them all. I want the first one, continue, second one, continue, third one, continue, fourth one, continue, fifth one, continue, sixth one, continue, seventh one, continue. Finish. So now I have a really big block pattern, and the reason I didn't have to worry about my height when I was making this is because I can always modify my height. So let's say that I had a 12-inch border I wanted to use this in. I'm going to modify pattern, continue, and now I'm not going to do anything with the width. I'm going to play with the height. So I'm going to click on height and say 12 inches. So now I have a 12-inch vertical line, but it didn't change my spacing here at all. So let's undo that. So the reason I like 1 inch for this is because 1 inch makes it really easy to scale this to whatever size I want. Let's zoom in, true size. So let's say I wanted 1/2 inch piano key border. So I'm going to say scale. I want 50%, 50. What did I put in? Probably, my zeros don't take a lot of times. Zoom, full. Okay, true size. So there's my 1/2 inch again, and if I want, and it does change my height. So again, if I want it to be 6 inches tall, I go to my height and say 6 inches. And now I have a 1/2 inch by 6 inch pattern all the way across. If I wanted it to be 1/4 inch, then I can again scale, and it's 25%, and enter, and we're already at true size. And again, I would have to play with my height so that it fills whatever size my block is. Now if I wanted to go bigger, so what if I wanted a 1 1/4? It's just scale it to 125%. Or if I wanted 1 1/2 inch, I would scale it to 150%. So that's how I play with the scaling, so I can get whatever size spacing I want without having to redo the pattern. Once I have this really big block, I'm going to save it because I've used it over and over and over again. So I'm going to say finished, save quilt pattern, save a pattern from the quilt, this one, and I'll just call it a piano key block because I know I already have something else like it in my folder. Enter. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to use it in a quilt. This is a quilt that's already been quilted, obviously, but this is the first place I use the piano key big block like I was showing. So out here in this border, this is the 1 inch, and in here it's the 1/2 inch. So I'm going to just show you how I set it up. Same border, I just scaled like I talked about. And remember, there are multiple ways to do things, so what I do may not be the most efficient, but it worked for me. I'm going to go Design Sew Quilt, Start New. Yes, I want to replace it. Yes, erase it, reset. And then I'm going to add a block pattern, and I'm not going to mark my whole border here because I'll move out of the way of the camera. So I'm going to mark on quilt, and I do have my clicker. So I'm going to lower my needle, which you can't see. And I marked the whole block or the whole border, the whole width, including my scallop, which I was going to cut out. I'm just going to mark just a little bit of it today. So let's just, let's just say that's my whole border there. Okay, now I need to add my pattern, finished. And I'm going to go down to mine. I should put a space in front of it, so mine's always up on top, but this is the one I made today, so let's use it. I'm going to scale it to 50%. And because it's one big block, I can move it around. So if I wanted a line dead center in my border, then I can make sure the line was there. If I wanted it to be a space dead center, I can adjust it so that's the space that's right smack dab in the center. Now, it's not paying any attention to my lines that are marked here because I'm bringing it in as a block. It's not rotated at all, so it's going to go straight up and down, and the lines are going to stay perfectly parallel. They don't care what the shape of the quilt is here. So I want to make sure that it's bigger than the block. I'm actually going to be cutting off down here, so I could just move it up. I just want to make sure that I'm going to be able to clip it off on the line. Finished. And if I was doing a whole long line and I only wanted to work in one section, then I can split this pattern and then just leave it sitting there. Split patterns. Because the spacing will stay the same if I'm not working on it. Split. And I'm going to split here, split, finished. Okay, so now I'm going to add a no-sew zone for my scallop down here. Add edit block, add block, no-sew zone. And I want it to affect just that pattern. I'm not worried about what's going out on the edges. Continue. And I'm going to mark it on the quilt. And again, I'm using my clicker. But my no-sew zone is just the scallop. And I'm over too far. So on the scallop, I'm going to put lots of clicks in because I want it to follow that edge when it's sewing. Alternatively, I could have it stop and manually stitch right along the edge. But what I really care about is a nice and smooth on that curve, and I don't know that I'm being that smooth today because I'm not actually going to stitch it. So, but the more clicks, the more accurate. So I've gotten to the end of the pattern that I'm sewing, so now I can just come down. And I just want to make sure I get all of that so that it doesn't try to sew on the other side of the scallop. I'm finished. And there it's blocking that out. Finished. My transition is continuous. I have options. I mean, I could put jump stitches in there, in which case I could go in and split each of those out, and then I could manually stitch when it came to the end around each part of the scallop. Or I could tie off, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to set it for continuous today, except yes. So now I still have too much sticking out up here, so I'm going to just add another block, add block, clipping block. I want it to affect this pattern, and as long as I'm pretty sure I click that in accurately, continue, I'm going to select an existing block, which is this one. Continue, and there it's clipped off everything. Finished. And again, I'm going to go with continuous, so it's going to sew down here, here, here. Anyway, except, yes, I do. Oh, sorry. Finished. Sew quilt. I only want that pattern because that's all I've set up right now. Continue. And I'm going to just do preview. And I should have looked to see where my start and stop were. It's going backwards from what I would have wanted. So that's it stitching. It would just stitch it out like that. I'm going to stop. I have marked a portion of my border that's going down the sides of the quilt. Let's just pretend that in this case this is all I can fit in the bed of my machine. So I want to go ahead and add my pattern. So add pattern, and it's a block pattern. And I'm going to use current block. Whoops. And it automatically went to the last catalog I used, which is mine. Okay, so it brings it in at an angle because it's trying to fit it into that block. And I know the rotation's at 230. It's just easier for me to go back to 0. So I'm going to say rotation. Whoops. I don't want that button at all. I want the pad. 0, enter. So now it's the way it was digitized. So from here, I know that I just need to turn it 90 degrees to have it running up and down the side of the quilt. Well, I could either have done the switch. Okay. So the scale is only at 15%, so I want this to be my 1-inch border. So I'm going to switch it to 100%, and it doesn't fit in here. Okay, so the way I digitized it, this is the width. But if I start playing with the width the way it is in right now, just tap, 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 notice it's stretching it this way. So before I can do that, because I've rotated it, I want to hit the update button. And now when I say the width, it's going to go the way I expected it to. So again, I could have set this all up for the whole border, and then I would be able to say, okay, where do I want my lines to be? Do I want it centered, a line or a space? You saw me do that already. So next I would be putting in my no-sew zone, so I'm going to finish this. And let's just pretend I already put the no-sew zone in because you saw me do it. I don't have to do a clipping block. Well, I would have had to split this pattern before I did the no-sew zone, or it would be trying to sew everything out that's there. I do need to split this pattern, so let's do that. I want everything to fit inside my block that I'm working on right now, so split and split. Okay. So now when I go to sew, I put my no-sew zone in. You're just going to have to imagine it. I did not do a clipping block. Say finished, sew quilt. Just want this section, continue. And sew quilt, because that's the only one I want to do. So I have my machine set up so that it automatically comes in to adjust every time before I start sewing. So I can bring my needle out to where the edge of the quilt is and run it along to see exactly where the edge is or where I want it to stop sewing. And then I'm going to just use this line. I'm going to snap it to the needle. So now it just cut all that off without having to put in a clipping block. And this would have already had the no-sew zone in there. My transition is continuous, especially when I'm going off the edge of the quilt. I don't want to have to stop for that. Say finished. And now it's going to start sewing the quilt. So last week someone brought me a quilt with great big flying geese in it, and she just wanted parallel lines in it. Now I could have just set up parallel lines and connected, but I had this piano key border already, so I used that instead. So I'm going to add a pattern. Wait a minute. Add pattern, block pattern. I want to select the block so you can see it. That one, continue. And I'm going to go down to piano key. Let's do that one, continue. Okay, I first of all want to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to scale it to 50% because I decided I wanted my lines spaced out a ½ inch rather than 1 inch. Well, it's still too narrow. Now remember, I have rotated this, so I'm going to hit update, and now I can say width. Let's just go, let's say 9 inches. It's going to be bigger than I need. Okay, so now I can move this around. If I want my line going straight through the point, I can move it so it does that, or if I want it to be a space, and a space might be better in case of her flying geese weren't all exactly right. So I'm going to say, okay, finished. And now I'm going to, this would have been a triangle that I marked on the quilt. I'm going to add a block, add block, clipping block. I want it to affect that pattern, continue. I'm going to select a block, that one, continue. So there's my parallel lines. I'm finished, and I do want continuous, so it's going to be sewing in my seams. Let me go down here, sew in that seam, up here, sew in this seam. I would keep an eye on it so that I can manually adjust it if I need to. I'm going to say accept and yes. So I would stitch that one out. I do not set them all up at once because as the quilt sews, it distorts. I could line up with one of these lines, but it's pretty close anyway. I can move on to my next block after I have that one done. And I'm going to add a pattern, add pattern, block pattern, select a block, that one, continue. Again, I want the piano keys, that, continue. I can just change my height here if I want to. Well, let's do the scale first. Scale 50%. My height, I think I went to 10 inches before, maybe it was 12. Height is 12. And that way I didn't have to do the update date. Rotate it 90 degrees. Now, because I already have this one on here, I can line it up so that all my lines look like they're stopping and then starting right back up in the next flying geese unit. So I can move this around until my lines are on top of the ones that are already stitched. And I could have realigned to that to make sure that was so. Finished. Finished. Add block. Add block. Clipping block. We're going to do this pattern, continue. I'm going to select an existing block, this one, continue. So this is what that quilt looked like in this picture. Hopefully you can see it a little bit. It came out really well. I want to show you just one more thing that I played with this. So this is a point-to-point pattern from Anne Bright, and I am using it in a Hello Sunshine quilt, but I decided I wanted to use it as a motif too. So I'm just going to run through the steps that I did on that. I don't want the lines if I'm going to use it as a motif. So I went in, split, here, and split. And now I can delete those two lines. Continue. Yes. Okay. So when it's in a 6-inch block, it's kind of, it's fine, but it can be a little bit more exciting. So what I did to make it a little more exciting is I add a block, add block, standard block. I want to create a pattern contour. And it wants to know which pattern, so I'm going to select this one, continue. And then I'm going to touch the area to be contoured. Well, I want it down here in the bottom of the cupcake, like I'm putting, like it has the cupcake liners on there. My gap right now is at 0. I don't want it that close because I don't want to have to hit exactly on the same line. So I just brought it in slightly. Finished. Now I'm going to add a pattern. Add pattern, block pattern. I'm going to use the current block because it's highlighted in red. It's that contour block I made. And I'm going to go down to my folder and to the piano keys, and there, continue. Well, that's not how I want it, so I'm going to rotate it to 0. Okay, I'm going to scale it up a little bit, but I do want my lines close together in this case. Oh, that's, don't want them so close that it's stitching on top. That's pretty good. Remember, I did rotate this, so I'm going to click the update before I start playing with my height and my width. So I want this definitely taller. Let's say 2 inches. Okay, that's good. Now, right now everything's going up and down. I'm actually going to, I'm going to go ahead and finished. I'm going to split this so I don't have as big a pattern there. Finished. Delete. I'm going to take, whoops, back up. Split pattern. That one. Split before I say finished. And delete. I'm going to take that off. Yes. Okay, so my lines are going straight up and down, but I can play with this. I'm going to modify my pattern, continue, and I'm going to distort, because now I can pull off on my edges and bring in here and here. And I can play with that so that I'm getting perspective on my cupcake. So now I have it going at angles out here on the edge and closer to straight up and down in the middle. Finished. And finished. I don't want to sew that whole piece out there, so I'm going to say finished. Add edit block, add block, clipping block. What do I want to clip? I want to clip that. I'm going to select an existing block, and I want that. Continue. And finished. I want continuous stitching, except yes. Now I could go in there and play so that I can find my starts and ends matching up. I don't know how much it's worth spending all that time. I did one more thing, has absolutely nothing to do with the piano keys, but just to dress up my cupcake. I'm going to add block, standard block, create a pattern contour. I'm contouring this because I can contour more than one spot. Continue. The area to be contoured is in there, and I've already got the narrow gap that I set down here. Finished. Add a pattern. Add pattern, block pattern. Use the current block, and this time I'm going to go up to the computer art there, and let's just try the spiral. Continue. Now that's going to be way too many spirals for that size circle. Let's go down one more. So let's try that. Finished, and it pops it right in there. Finished. So now I have a swirl on the top of my cupcake too. So just some ways to play with those piano keys. I'm going to show you one more, how to make your beadboard. You won't be able to scale it as much because of the narrower section. Okay, so let's make a beadboard border. Kind of is piano keys, but it's got the narrow and the wider. We're start new. I want a block pattern, and again, it doesn't matter how big the block is. We'll go with the 6 inches. I want my grid on, and I want my grid at 1/4 inch this time. And I want my snap on. Finished. I want to go to the geometric catalog and the line. Continue. I want to rotate it. Whoops, I should have left it at the 45 right where it was. And I'm going to move it. I'm going to snap it in one side. I'm going to say stretch, zoom out. Remember, with the stretch we have to touch an anchor point of the pattern, so I'm going to touch the one that's up there on the block already. And then I'm going to grab this and slide it. Whoops, I don't want it at an angle. Right in there. And I'm going to say finished, zoom in. Let's see, whoops. Let's go back out a little bit and pan. Okay, I'm going to repeat the pattern, so I want that one. Continue. I want 2 of those, and this time I want my distance to just be 1/4 inch. So there's my gap right there. Finished. I'm going to combine these patterns. I want that one first. I'm going to swap my start and end, so I start up there. Continue. I'm going to go to that one, and I want it to start sewing there. Continue and continuous sewing. And when I'm doing beadboard, I like for my shortest line to be the one that's in the ditch if I'm going off the edge of the quilt, so that's why I'm connecting it down there. And finished. I still need to add a spacer so that I move from here over to where this one's going to start. So I'm going to add a pattern, block pattern, use the current block. I'm going to do the line again. There. Continue. And I want to rotate it 45 degrees that way. My width, I want it to be 3/4 inch. Going to move it, snap it in there. Finished. Combine patterns. This one, continue. This one, I need to swap my start and end. Continue. Finished. So now I would save this as a bead board, but when I go to use it, I'm going to do this, continue, and my repeats, however many I want, and there's my bead board. Now, this one, I could save it as a big long one, and I might. I've used it just with the individual ones, but okay, if you save it as the big long one, then that keeps all your lines perfectly parallel, straight up and down. But if you go to scale it, you're going to start having issues here because this is going to get, if you're going down, this is going to get very narrow. So it's not quite as flexible as the 1-inch piano keys. Anyway, so that's some things to play with.